My name is Anissa Mitchell with PMD Alliance, and you are here for the Caregiver Stress Syndrome is Real conversation today. I'm so glad that you were able to join us for this conversation. Really excited to talk about a very real experience about caregiver stress syndrome, including the prevalence, the impact on care partners' health, some ways that you might be able to protect yourself from burnout, and give you some tools and some tips. So this is something that has been near and dear to my heart for a while. And some of you may have even participated in this, but back in 2022, we conducted in partnership with another company, a survey just for care partners. We surveyed close to 700 care partners around their experience of caring for their loved one with Parkinson's. And, I think that these statistics are probably similar to what you might see in other research, but of our cohort, 87% of our care partners reported that the caregiving tasks were having a negative impact on their emotional health. 84% indicated it was having a negative impact on their mental health, and 76% on their physical health. And so we recognize this is a really important and very real experience. And so we wanted to bring in an expert who works in this field and speaks in this on this topic quite regularly. In fact, the speaker that you're getting the luxury of hearing from today, Dr. William Sieber, he is someone that I attended a course and heard him speak and said, I need him to come to PMD Alliance and speak on this topic for our care partners. So I'm very grateful to him for being a part of today's program. But he is a clinical professor at UC San Diego in both the family medicine department as well as the Department of Psychiatry. He is co-founder of the UC San Diego Integrated Behavioral Health Program, and he has presented to over 200,000 care providers on topics such as management of anxiety, caregiver stress, and burnout. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Sieber. Thank you so much for joining us. I know he has a presentation, so I'm going to let him take it from here.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you everyone for taking an hour out of your day to hopefully get some valuable information. I think one of the things that I tend to pride myself on, or at least try to do, is to take what research and the evidence shows is effective, but actually make it kind of implementable or more practical. So one thing, just as a point of introduction, I'm trained as a clinical health psychologist. And as Nissa mentioned, I am the director for integrated behavioral health, which is helping a great number of people get through rough patches in their lives. So I practice clinically, still see clients a good 20, 25 hours per week, as well as oversee the 12 clinics. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of get us started. And start here. Okay, yes, there we go. And one thing I want to start off with is there's of the many reasons why I have taken an interest in this topic. Two of them specifically have to do with the fact that like 20 years ago, when I was doing research in psychoneuroimmunology and the impact of stress on our immune system, a colleague of mine was doing research, and he showed that 5 years after a care provider, a family care provider, after the person they were caring for had passed and died, 5 years later, their immune systems were still compromised compared to people who were not in such a kind of chronic role, stressful role. Second thing is the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen quite an uptick in the number of people I see who are a spouse caring for someone with either Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or some other neurodegenerative disease that really is taking a toll on their health. And so I really kind of shifted and spent more time here. And finally, on a personal note, one of the things, the takeaways and messages of today is, this is really kind of seeing that we are trying to work side by side with the person that we care for and that we love. And my family, when I was younger, we would take road trips once in a while, and probably once an hour, we would find some kind of community by singing the song. I had no idea who Patsy Cline was. I don't even know if my parents kind of were fans of hers, but and I promise not to sing, but we ain't got a barrel of money. We're ragged and funny, but we'll travel along singing a song side by side through all kinds of weather, whatever the sky should fall. It doesn't matter. We're just traveling along side by side. So kind of keep that in mind because, so often um, the care partner is literally the life partner, the spouse, the wife or the husband. Now, what I would encourage you to do, if you don't already, is get a couple pieces of paper and a pen, because again, before this hour is out, I hope to give you two or three things that are going to be actionable that you can actually put into practice pretty quickly. I also will respectfully ask that you hold questions either until the end. I hopefully will allow a good 15 minutes or so for us to kind of review something that I went through too quickly, or if you have questions, or else put them in the chat and we can kind of retrieve them at the end. But in terms of what we'll be covering today, certainly the definition and the prevalence, what is the problem that's going on? I'll spend some time talking about interventions to help people that we care about maintain cognitive functioning, cognitive decline. And then hopefully the majority of our time really is not only talking about the impact that this can have on our health as care providers, but specifically, how do we minimize that impact? Because I've spent probably a little over 40 years now helping people minimize the impact of stress on their health, as well as minimizing the impact on their emotional and psychological well-being as a result of some physical challenge. And while I'll be covering a lot today, perhaps there may be a time in the future when I can come back and kind of talk about a variety of topics that are affecting or associated with caregiver stress syndrome in terms of the dual relationships of being a care provider and a spouse or a daughter or a son. Talk about issues about post-traumatic growth or other topics such as resilience. Now, beyond just Parkinson's, realize that caretaking really has become quite prevalent in the U.S. these days. Cancer actually is one of the top 5 reasons why people are finding that they're devoting many hours a week to the care of someone else. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and cardiac arterial disease is also very common, and it's associated also with cognitive disabilities, which people may not be thinking about, and certainly chronic pain, probably the most prevalent of all. Not only about 1 out of every 6 adults experience some type of chronic pain, but about a third of those are fairly disabled as a result. When it comes to Alzheimer's disease, certainly about 7 million people, it's been estimated, over the age of 65 have some stage of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. And not really clear why, but the East Coast and the southeastern US tend to have the highest prevalence rates of Alzheimer's disease. I don't want to fail to mention some of the health inequities that are out there. As compared to white adults, Black Americans are about twice as likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's before their death. And about 50% more than white adults. Hispanic adults also are diagnosed at a higher rate than white adults with Alzheimer's. African Americans, also very important to understand, they tend to have much more of a collectivist mentality and approach and perspective on things versus the rugged individualism that we're seeing so often in the US. And this actually adds to their sense of interdependence and kind of the reciprocal relationships. So they're more likely to take on more of the caregiver role than perhaps their kind of white counterparts. But there's also certainly disadvantages. African Americans also encounter more barriers because of their just general kind of distrust of institutional care because of racism to some form or another. But when it comes to Parkinson's, now some of you may be familiar given the PMD Alliance, but this is actually the world's fastest growing neurological disease, second only to Alzheimer's in terms of neurodegenerative disorders in the US. About 1 million Americans are living with Parkinson's disease, and this is looking to increase by a good 20% or more in the next few years. I think one of the things that is under acknowledged is there's 6 million children under the age of 18 that are providing care for either someone with Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's disease. either a parent or a grandparent, and this is often because of the costs of in-home care that they after school they're taking on that role. So why has this been kind of such an increasing in the incidence and prevalence? Certainly the aging of the population overall, but also just a greater appreciation for the disease and going earlier in the disease process, kind of with a physician being able to assess the symptoms. When we are caring for a loved one with Parkinson's disease, on average, it's about 30 hours a week or more, and half of them actually say they're providing care for more than 100 hours. So that would be certainly living with the patient, with the persons with Parkinson's. 60% have been doing this for a year, and over a third have been doing it for 5 years or longer. That's kind of a major factor as to why we see the health decline of the care provider, because in fact it goes on for so long. Now, nearly half of people with Parkinson's require memory-related support at some point in time. And the caregivers are assisting with a variety of things, including the basics, the activities of daily living, such as bathing and dressing. Most caregivers, half of them, are also fully or near fully employed outside of the home and the work they're doing for their loved one. And then a third say that they really need more resources and tools to manage their own stress and health. And that brings us to today. Now, it was just over 2.5 years ago that the International Classification of Disorders group now has recognized officially caregiver stress syndrome as a, if you will, a diagnostic code for which I, as among others, can get reimbursed for helping people with what's going on. It's going to be impairing their functioning almost by definition, but really the characteristics are just feeling chronically depleted, tired and exhausted, being annoyed, frustrated, definitely feelings of resentment over time because of what they're doing and getting kind of under acknowledged or appreciated for that. All too often feeling guilty that they're not doing enough despite all that they are doing. Toward the second half of this hour, I'll be focusing a fair amount on loneliness. This is not only seen as a public health problem in the US of social isolation, but caregivers tend to suffer the biggest impact on our health is it tends to be an isolating type of situation. Anxiety, always vigilant, trying to protect someone from falling or doing something that they're going to get in trouble for. Do I take them to the emergency department or not? And throughout the process, feelings of loss, the dreams that won't be realized, grief in terms of looking and watching your loved one kind of feel helpless or in decline. So let me go on really to what can we do for the person with Parkinson's, certainly at various stages of kind of cognitive decline, mild cognitive impairment, or certainly beyond Parkinson's as well in terms of neurodegenerative disorders and dementia. Well, first of all, what are the things that have been kind of shown in the last 5 to 10 years that are really maybe potentially modifiable risk factors for developing cognitive impairment and dementia? One is actually having less education early in life. This may be a proxy for our socioeconomic status, but certainly the cognitive skills built up early in life may be seen as a protective factor for cognitive decline when we get late in our later years. When we reach midlife, the things that are most predictive then of developing dementia of some sort 20 and 30 years down the road, hearing loss, certainly head injury and high blood pressure, but also the ongoing misuse of alcohol or dealing with obesity. Once we're in our mid-60s and beyond, people who are still smoking, struggling with kind of untreated depression, feeling socially isolated, and are physically inactive are also running the risk or increasing the risk of developing cognitive impairment. And this study actually just came out just a few months ago. Several thousand, I think well over 10 or 20,000 people that they surveyed, and they followed them over time, and 6 symptoms earlier in life tended to increase dementia risk later on. That is, having low self-esteem or low confidence in oneself, problems even early in adulthood with concentration and attention, not being able to face up to problems. Now, this is in the psychological jargon, avoidance coping. And I will tell you, the most effective way to lower anxiety or stress is to turn and run away. Very effective in the short run, and it's absolutely the worst thing you can do in the long run. So apparently, over relying on distraction and avoidance has just one more cost to it. That is perhaps a higher risk of dementia. I highlighted the feeling or not feeling warmth and affection from others. This is representing the social isolation, sense of loneliness, and being nervous and anxious all the time. If you're not developing some skills to cope with the stressors of life and just kind of fretting and ruminating about things, again, that's kind of brain energy that's kind of going to little use. And then just being unhappy or annoyed with the way things are turning out in your day-to-day life. So let me pivot to, so what are some of those things that we can do if in fact cognitive decline does show up? Certainly assistive digital technology. There are three primary ways to intervene, kind of cognitively oriented that I'll review, and then physical exercise as well. Now, this is certainly not my field. It's well beyond my scope, but there's all types of different brain stimulations, transcranial magnetic stimulation, theta burst technology, and all of these have various kind of effectiveness. It's not clear from the literature if there's predictive variables that we could identify to say, oh, this person is or is not or is more likely to benefit. So that's kind of where the literature is at this point in time. Now, a lot of people are interested in nutritional factors, diets that might kind of help with cognitive abilities. Those tend to be pretty scrutinized and criticized for low research quality. So it's very hard to draw pretty firm or clear conclusions from that, though clearly a plant-based diet is almost universally promoted. Now, kind of as an entree to the technology I'm about to share with you, there are two main kind of systems of memory, the explicit and the implicit memory systems. Now, the explicit memory is when we're consciously kind of recalling something about an event that occurred in the past, different facts about a situation 2 weeks, 2 months earlier. Now, when we do this, that is really activating the section or structure in our brain referred to as the medial temporal lobe. And this part of the brain is actually the first area that's affected in dementia before it spreads to other areas. That's why that, if you will, midterm memory is likely to be affected as an early symptom. Now, the implicit memory, and this is important, is really kind of beyond our conscious awareness. Implicit memory includes procedural memory, like learning how to ride a bike and you never unlearn that. Habit and pattern learning, it's kind of an overlearned thing. Well, it's interesting because the areas of the brain that are associated with this are those areas that remain intact until you're in the much later and severe stages of dementia. So that's why these tools are focusing on kind of that procedural memory. Now, visual mapping software has been used in kind of medicine and education for quite a while. You think of assistive medication labels, helping people remember to take their medications. Mind mapping, specifically in this instance, is where there's going to be a series of instructions that are visually represented, and it's a step-by-step process, kind of cutting up into chunks, if you will, things that you and I might take for granted, but people with mild cognitive impairment and beyond tend to really struggle with this. Now, I have no financial investment in any of these companies, but three examples of these that you might kind of look up later on would include Simple Mind Map, or something that's called Mind Meister, or Creately. Now, when, if you will, patients, people with Parkinson's, with dementia, kind of use this for 3 months, it actually shows that it helps not only the person with the Parkinson's, but also decreases the burden on the caregiver. So some visual examples of this, on a tablet or an iPad or even on your phone, the day pops up, And on the left is maybe kind of the names and pictures of people, the partner who's going to be there later in the morning. Maybe your niece is going to be visiting later in the day. And then there's a schedule showing that, okay, the morning walk is planned for 11 o'clock. You're going to FaceTime with some of your family members at 2, and then later in the day, remember to, if you will, brush your hair. But even more, if you will, microscopically, the software, these packages can be used. And again, dividing what is a multi-step process and giving each step a visual cue. So in order to put on shoes, you have to literally put on socks, perhaps, untie the laces, and then slip on the shoes, tie the laces, etc. So it really breaks it down into smaller parts. Even so far as to say, if you're thirsty, where in the cupboard, you take a picture of the cupboard in the kitchen that holds the glasses. Then you fill up the water, then you drink. So it might seem extremely kind of basic to you and I, but certainly as the cognitive decline continues, these things can be very, very useful. Now, beyond assistive digital technology, there's three main ways that we have that are more cognitively oriented. One is cognitive training, where we target a particular kind of cognitive function. Second, kind of more elaborate, if you will, is cognitive stimulation. That's involving both the cognitive as well as the social functioning of the individual. And finally, and probably a little harder to obtain, is individualized cognitive rehab. This is where a person well trained in these procedures can sit down with a family and say, what are the specific 3 or 4 kind of activities of daily living that we really want to maintain this person's independence, and kind of how do we work on their functioning level on these areas. So cognitive training. So some examples would be adaptive chunking. This is where you take kind of, again, a behavior and kind of cut it up into smaller chunks. And people, especially with mild dementia, this can lead to significant improvements in verbal working or that explicit memory. So one example that we all have is if I just gave you my phone number and just rattled off 10 numbers in a row, that would be much more difficult than if I told you it's 213-363-2143, right? So that's chunking as an example. Another kind of cognitive training that can be done to help people maintain as much independence, independent functioning as possible, is prospective memory. When you're trying to remember to do something, taking medications or even turning off the stove might be examples. Again, very, very important when it comes to people who are in the preclinical stages of dementia or decline. Here, a lot of, whether it be Post-it notes, what's called habit stacking, that is working a lot with people who are trying to remember to take a newly prescribed medication. Well, if it's to be taken in the morning, then you would put that pill bottle next to the coffee machine or next to the kettle, the teapot, for example. Whiteboards are something I probably universally recommend to families, people that I'm working with, large calendars, so they know exactly what's expected of the day. Smartphones, I certainly rightfully am accused of using my smartphone and my calendar, probably more than most people, but it can alert me and remind me, oh, this appointment is happening, or now is the time to kind of wash up for dinner, types of things. And also, if you're looking at people in the preclinical or mild stages of dementia, new learning is going to be very, very helpful. Developing simple new hobbies, whether it be abstract painting, paint by numbers, stamp collecting, learning basic phrases, just trying to learn 5 or 6 phrases in a new language that you're not familiar with, or even doing do-it-yourself projects around the house can also be helpful here. Now, cognitive stimulation, that second kind of category of approach, and these are not mutually exclusive, but it's actually aims to enhance their person's general cognitive and social functioning. Think of day treatment centers. The data that I will share with you in another slide or two, this is very, very helpful. If you can get your loved one, persons with Parkinson's as an example, to get them into a day treatment program, because it's going to enhance their memory, their language comprehension and communication skills, absolutely decreases anxiety and depression, and improves their quality of life. Now, what's added to this is the use of music, where their group might be a sing-along. Certainly visual memories are important. Some of you may have seen a few years ago, there was an hour-long series on Lady Gaga helping Tony Bennett prepare for his final performance, I think, on Broadway. And lo and behold, here's a guy who really was fairly impaired at that point in time, and yet he was able to kind of recall, like 36 different songs that he had sang over the years. So that, again, that becomes almost procedural memory, and those areas of the brain are the ones that are spared longest during the dementing process. Life story work. Now, this is something that you might really kind of consider with the person you're caring for. It's not just reminiscing about the past. This actually improves communication and understanding of the individual's past life. And the first part of this is having the person who's starting to show kind of memory and cognitive decline, early stage in the disease. It's going to help them develop an identity, remind themselves of their identity and pride in the life that they've led. Now, what's interesting about this is that it can be best implemented if you're doing this, and let's say that you as the caregiver, you might be the primary caregiver, but it's you, but maybe also there's a nephew or a niece, a grandson or granddaughter, a neighbor, friends, a sibling who can come in. And each time they come in, they're not just kind of, if you will, reminiscing about whatever comes up. They might say, oh, let's take the in your 20s. So grandpa, kind of tell me about your 20s. Where did you live? What kind of work did you do? What friends did you have, relationships, and so forth? And so what you're doing is chronologically creating an autobiography. It doesn't have to be a full-on book, but kind of highlighting the teenage years or favorite holidays, all the way up to the present time. Now, when people do this, what you're doing is also shifting away from remembering details about what the address was of that house you lived on, perhaps 40 years ago. And it's really more about the affective meaning that as people's social world narrows, it's really hanging on to how it felt when we celebrated your 80th birthday, et cetera. And again, very, very important that this helps with people with mild to moderate dementia. And if you put in not just verbal memories and recalling things, but photographs, videos, and music can also be helpful. Example of this would be two guys on a porch, perhaps. Wait, is it a heart? No, it's an eagle. No, wait. No. Is it a mermaid? That's in 2055, a retirement village. Residents play a game of guess what the tattoo used to be. So again, life story work, it draws on residual long-term memory and connecting the knots, not just kind of episodic and spotty. Very helpful for promoting self-esteem and well-being, and especially when it's done in conjunction with people who are familiar or who are in the caregiving role to some degree, because it can help you understand maybe sometimes their confused or agitated behavior when it arrives. So again, just showing a couple reminiscing about maybe them 30, 40 years earlier. And the third kind of most labor intensive perhaps approach to helping people maintain their cognitive functioning is what's referred to as cognitive rehab. This is setting usually a very small number, maybe 3 or 4 goals that are realistic, that have to do with performing daily tasks or kind of behaving appropriately in daily situations, rather than a cognitive task per se. It turns out that when you find a professional and can do this, that 3 months after receiving this kind of help, not only does it improve the person with cognitive dysfunction, maintain some level of independence, but also helps the caregiver's distress level. And then finally, in terms of intervening with cognitive functioning, physical exercise is incredibly important here. Addressing muscle strength. Certainly higher levels of physical activity are associated with slower brain atrophy, increased creation of new or expanded neural networks in the brain, and reducing the risk of progression of dementia. And keep in mind too that walking is it's a cognitive process. It's not just physical. And therefore, it's very helpful when, prior to and when gait disturbances or the risk of falling starts to increase. Walking can be a very effective cognitive and physical intervention. But what is the most difficult thing to do about exercise is actually following through and doing it. As this comic shows, she says to her husband in bed, I was going to wake up early to go jogging, but my toes voted against me 10-1. Now, what I'd like to do is, and I know I'm going quickly, but there's a couple of things I really want to share with you in terms of how do we minimize the impact on the care provider? Because ample evidence over 20, 30 years showing increased rates of depression and anxiety. It affects our immune system in pretty negative ways, affects our blood pressure, increases risk of cardiovascular disease, our own cognitive decline, and really compassion fatigue. Now, compassion fatigue is epitomized by this meme. I think one of the silver linings, if you will, of the COVID pandemic was a bunch of memes that hopefully brightened our day or kind of lightened the mood once in a while. And this one basically is depicting after listening to Linda His Human for 12 days while in quarantine as she complained for hours on end, Sparky realized he was not cut out to be an emotional support dog. So it's exhausting, not only emotional support, but all the physical support that's also going on. More than half of care providers pretty quickly report impaired sleep, feeling more isolated and alone from family and friends. And what's critical here, more than a third of caregivers do not try to get help from others. That's the problem. They report their own health is failing because they're not keeping their appointments with their own physician, or they're missing medication doses because they're kind of so focused on the person they're caring for. Very critical in terms of that you're providing care for indeterminate time periods. You don't know how long this is going to last. And it's not just physical, emotional, it's certainly also financial, occupational stressors that are going on. We're constantly vigilant, trying to make sure that the person we're caring for is safe. And because of that, I put in parentheses here, lack of separation between the stressors. Next slide, I'm going to share with you why this is so critical. Again, social isolation, the last exercise we'll do before I take questions today, is social isolation. And 500,000 people in England studied over 60, 65 years. The number one predictor of how long a person will last in this lifetime is, are they feeling socially connected or are they feeling isolated? And the impact that it has on our blood pressure. And interestingly, loneliness and social isolation affects our behavior in a variety of ways, not just by affecting our blood pressure, but it also affects our sleep. There's a higher rate of alcohol or substance misuse or overuse. We tend to be less physically active. Interestingly, the flip side, there are actually fewer, but there are a few studies showing that there's actually greater longevity for people who are caregivers. In fact, this suggests that there's the beneficial effects may in part be because it strengthens, for some, it strengthens their connections with family or friends and gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. So again, there's pluses and minuses to that. But really, what are we going to try and do? How do we help you that are caring for others and others that we know that are in a similar kind of position? Well, we do know that about half of caregivers do try to kind of focus on and maintain some physical activity and exercise. Unfortunately, about a third turn to increasing their consumption of alcohol or use of marijuana. And what I also highlighted near the bottom is 1 out of 5 have done nothing to relieve their stress. So what I want to share with you are a couple of things that are pretty important, that are very doable, very implementable. Now, I think everyone, I believe, is familiar with the term fight or flight or freeze response. So for decades, we thought that certainly our nervous system becomes activated when there's a stress, and then it relaxes, or the parasympathetic nervous system, there's a relaxation response. Well, okay, that's perhaps how our bodies have been designed, but that actually doesn't really ring true for the kinds of stressors we experience in 2026. Instead, I want you to think of stress as a staircase. We don't have one stress in the day in the morning and then we recover. We go immediately on to something else, some other task. We have to get the laundry from the washer to the dryer. We have to kind of pull out something from the freezer to defrost for tonight's dinner. Or we have to make another 3 phone calls or whatever it might be. And so we just keep going up and up and up and up. So what I want you to kind of write down, keep in mind, a takeaway message for today is the best way to think about managing stress is you want to gain separation between the stressors. Gain separation between the stressors. So the evidence from all kind of corners of the research world show that people who say, oh, I can't wait for my vacation, 9 months from now, or I'll take care of myself when this whole thing is over, right? They actually have the worst health. Separation between the stressors is being able to do things several times throughout the day. So one way I've kind of developed to remember this is what I refer to as the 20-second reset. Because the evidence shows that if you tell people to listen to a relaxation tape, guided imagery on a CD or an MP3 or Spotify or the Calm app or whatever it might be, people don't do it. They're just too exhausted. I don't have enough time. I just want to fall asleep. But what they can do is something that takes only 20 seconds. So how do you maximize relaxation in 20 seconds? There's only 2 components to this. The first one is you take 2 slow-paced diaphragmatic belly breaths. So for most of us, that would be inhale for 2 or 3 seconds, and then exhale for 4, 5, maybe even 6 seconds. Now, the reason why you want to make the exhale longer than your inhale is because all the research evidence shows that your relaxation response, your parasympathetic nervous system, is more activated when you exhale than when you inhale. Since you have to do both, just prolong the exhale. And if that takes you 10 seconds, you can do that twice in 20 seconds. But the second component of this is pretty critical. Now, you may already know whether you're a visually oriented person or you're really focusing on the smells or odors or scents of things. Or maybe you're more kind of into the sounds, music, and you're more kind of auditorily oriented. Well, what you want to do is find out what we refer to as your dominant sensory modality. What sense do you focus on most? And then, so let's say that you, the next day or two, do a 5 or 10 minute relaxation. And during that time, notice what is it you focus on. Do you focus on the colors or shapes of things? You might be visually dominant. If instead you focus on the sounds of things, the crashing of the waves, the whistling of the wind through the trees or the birds, you may be more auditorily dominant. Or maybe you're focusing on the pine scent or the salty, briny air as you approach the coast. Okay, well, if that's the case, you're maybe more olfactory or, smell, odor, scent oriented. Choose just 2 or 3 words that represent that sense and say those words during each exhale. So you inhale for 2 or 3 seconds. During your 4 or 5, maybe 6-second exhale, you might say blue puffy. Or you might, instead, if you're more auditorily oriented, you might say pounding waves or whistling wind. That's only 20 seconds. I would argue that 20 seconds, you could do that several times throughout your day. That's actually how you get separation between the stressors. Now, the last 2 tools I want to share with you have to do with about support. Now, there's all kinds of support that we should be trying to garner as care providers and caregivers. Informational support, we get references, workshops, this kind of webinar, go to Parkinson's Foundation, AARP. You want to be informed what's available. Well, there's also tangible support. That is, you're literally going to arrange for Meals on Wheels, or maybe the VA or other resources you have can provide respite care or transportation to at least some amount of taking your loved one to a medical appointment. Different type of support is emotional support. This is usually one-on-one. Dear friends who can provide empathy, encouragement. They validate how difficult the situation is that you're going through. The network support is different in the sense that it's not one-on-one kind of empathy and complimenting you on the valiant efforts you're putting in, but it's more just feeling part of a larger community, part of a church or some community organization. There's a couple of references. Actually, these slides will be made available to you pretty quickly. From Parkinson's Foundation, there is actually just within the last year, a colleague of mine, Barry Jacobs, and his wife, Julia Mayer, wrote a book in conjunction with AARP called the Caregiver Answer Book. But again, there's lots of resources. And I would encourage you to at least consider or think about joining a clinical trial. So you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and see if, in fact, they're doing something that might benefit you by participating in it. And they're studying to see, is this intervention or modifying your schedule in this way, is it more kind of beneficial than some other way? But if there's one thing that I really want you to understand, asking others for help sometimes is the biggest challenge I face when I'm working with caregivers. Sometimes the simplest tasks seem daunting. It's because you're doing everything. So think about this. I mean, take out the trash cans, bring them back in when the garbage truck goes away. That's not a big deal, but it's just one more thing to remember. Taking your loved one to daycare or doing grocery shopping. So what I want you to think of is this. You want to gather information on what is it you need. Is it you need a timeout and you need a couple of hours away? Do you need to get some legal advice about the next step of care and kind of more intensive care providing, financial support? And then once you've done that, think of different people in your life, could be neighbors, friends, family, and match your need with what you think they actually are good at. The biggest barrier I've seen is a reluctance to ask for help. Okay, you're independent, you're highly responsible. Congratulations. But think of it this way. Oh, I don't want to burden somebody. No, 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 no. I don't want to I don't want to bring down the room by sharing what's going on. Well, wait a minute. You know how satisfying it feels when you help others. So why are you denying others that same opportunity to feel good about helping? I actually worked with a woman, Barbara. Her husband, John, with Parkinson's, was kind of developing certainly some significant cognitive decline. And she was reluctant to ask for help. And she said, oh, well, I usually go out to lunch with friends. There's a group of four of us that go out to lunch like every third Thursday of the month. And she said that she hadn't done that for several months. I said, well, why is that? She said, well, I don't want to burden them. I don't want to be talking about, all the hassles and the stress of dealing with John's decline. And when I finally was able to encourage her to go, since she hadn't been for several months, she was surprised to find, but she actually had evidence now to kind of go and contradict her assumption that she'd be a burden. And she found out that after over a 2-hour lunch, she only spent 10 minutes talking about herself, that others were talking about kind of struggles and stressors they were going through. But on another piece of paper, what I want you to think about is write down this kind of a matrix. Now with Barbara, what I did is to say, okay, so any neighbors, can they help with anything? Well, Steve certainly is not a really empathic, emotionally intelligent, sensitive kind of guy. So she actually asked her neighbor, Steve, if he would take out the trash every Monday night and bring it back in Tuesday afternoon when it had been collected. He had said yes, and he started to do that. She had asked her friend Mary if she could drive John to daycare, but she could only do it on the second and fourth Wednesdays. Okay, great. But now, in kind of talking with her, she identified another friend, Sue, and basically what this matrix helps you do is say, okay, well, between now and let's say within the next week, can you simply approach Sue and ask her if she'd be willing to take either the first or third or both the first and third Wednesdays? And then when you ask her, mark it as checked off, you've done that, and then confirm when in fact that's able to happen. Kevin, also a guy who is not going to be able to help with a variety of things, but he was a former golf partner of John, and John wasn't playing golf anymore. But to give Barbara some respite, he would come over. It's like one or two Saturdays a month, and just watch golf. He'd watch the golf tournament, the Masters, the Tournament of Champions. And again, that gave her some respite. But you're matching what a person's strength might be. So, for example, if there's I need to fill out a form, or there's technology and I'm not really all that well versed and capable on the internet or technology. So maybe you get a niece or nephew, a grandson or grandchild to help you with that. And then the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare really have developed what's called a guide model to support those of us who are in caregiver roles. GUIDE simply stands for Guiding an Improved Dementia Experience. I suggest you kind of Google this and look this up because there is some financial support that they may be able to offer for respite care. They will help give you ideas about how to deal with the stressors that you might be going through and agree to assess you every 6 months or so to kind of be an external guideline for you and just monitoring and support. So remember that respite care is a primary, not a secondary, it's a primary task of being a caregiver because you can see yourself as a quarterback, but you're not playing all positions on the team. So it really, I have one woman that I've been working with for now quite a while, and I just admire the fact she is like coordinating literally something like 30 to 40 hours a week of respite care in order to get that respite and that break. Her work, a lot of her work, is coordinating when people call in sick and arranging that back and forth. And the last thing before we end, I'm really running out of time. Social network onion exercise. This is for social support. So what I'd like you to do is get that one last perhaps piece of paper, that's blank piece of paper, and I want you to orient it in front of you landscape. So it's more wide than it is tall. And all I want you to do is in the center of that paper, about the size of a quarter, just make a circle. And then about an inch and a half outside of that circle, draw another concentric circle that creates a band around that center circle, and do that another 2 times. So you got 3 bands around the central circle. In the center circle, either write the word me or put down your first name. In the inner band that right around the word me or your name, I want you to write down the names of maybe 1, 2, or 3 people in your life who you would consider dear, dear friends. They're really kind of intimate friends. You can share just about anything with them. So for me, I put down examples of maybe that's Lisa or Kirk or Hanalei. Okay. So write down the names, first names of hopefully at least maybe 2 or 3 people. And I know I'm doing this fast, but then the circle outside that ring, write down the names, the first names of people that they're friends, they're good friends, but maybe for me, I just wouldn't share the same things with Sarah that I do with Lisa. Or maybe I just don't think of Julie as quite as close to me and kind of my kind of secrets, if you will, as Kirk or Hanalei. And then the third outer ring, Jim and Larry and Ken are friends of mine, but Jim is kind of a fantasy football guy. Or I play golf with Larry, but not much else. Now, once you do this, how do we make this practical and implementable? Once you've written down the names of people in each level of these 3 rings, then go to either the outer or the middle ring and pick one of those names and say, what would need to happen, for example, what you're seeing on the screen for me, what would I need to share with Julie that she doesn't know, but Lisa and Kirk do? Is it that she doesn't know a certain history of my life? Is it maybe just a matter of frequency? I get together with Lisa and Hanalei a lot more often than I do with Julie. Or maybe, again, Ken is only in one certain circumstance. So what you want to do is to say, so what would it take? So maybe, and this is where it becomes practical, in the next week, just make one move, take one action. Maybe it's all you're going to do is you're going to text someone. For me, it's Jim, and I'm going to say, hey, Jim, I know you play golf. I've only really kind of connected with you about fantasy football. Would you be interested in sharing around a golf with me in the next month or so? Or maybe I, kind of send an email or call Julie and say, hey, Julie, can we find a place on our calendar that we can, meet for coffee or maybe have lunch? I'd like to kind of connect with you better than I have in the past. That's actually how you address the issue of social isolation. Don't have time for that or this. So really, in conclusion, really kind of similar to the COVID pandemic, we're kind of sharing this experience of actually feeling alone. And then maybe we're not traveling alone. We're actually traveling together with a partner who is in decline. And certainly it's taking the toll on us, but we are doing it side by side. So I appreciate your time. If you're interested in more, I think that these slides will be made available pretty soon by the PMD Alliance. I want to thank them for hosting this. Really would love to connect with any of you in terms of joining me on LinkedIn. Or even on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube. My channel is at William Sieber PhD. There's a kind of a small library of a variety of topics that I've spoken on. But again, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, uh, you made several points, and somebody made a comment that I kind of wanted to point out. So, I think, and I want your input on this. A lot of care partners feel like they're okay for a period of time managing and juggling all of the tasks. And, I've kind of equated to like a scale. Do you remember when we used to weigh things on the scales and the scale? And, it tips a little bit heavier for the care partner, but it's okay. They're managing. And then more stuff comes, and then it tips a little heavier, and it tips and it tips and tips until they finally are like completely loaded down, and are in that burnout phase. And sometimes it's, creeps up on them all of a sudden, and they don't realize it until they're like completely experiencing stress related issues or whatever. Or they recognize that they're just not doing well. But I wanted to talk about that because you've referenced some things around, that intense hypervigilance that many care partners, experience when they're always watching out for the loved one. And the point that this other person made, that Antoinette made, about almost like perfectionism, like because somebody else might do things differently than they might do, they don't necessarily allow for good enough to be enough. Perfection has to be the standard, and therefore that just adds more burden on them. So how would you say, or what would you say to care partners that are battling like this, crossing over that line, needing to give up some control? Because you gave a beautiful example of how people could easily engage those around them with small and easy tasks. How do you get past the barrier here to allow that help to happen?
Well, that's a packed with a lot of questions in there.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. It's a
I
very loaded question.
I think that what I will say is that, and maybe next time I can speak more about controllability, perceived control, because that's pretty key in terms of our sense of control and how we experience stress as a result of that. So maybe that's a topic for a future webinar. But I think that what we refer to as cognitive flexibility is kind of a major concept of being able to say, can I think about this from a different perspective? Why is this so important, or why is it so important now? A lot of anxiety has to do with, things that need to get done, but kind of maybe an inaccurate perception that it needs to get done like now or soon. I think also, over the years in working with clients, what's become apparent is one way that I understand how people continue to be frustrated in trying to get their loved one to do something, and they're not remembering to do it, they're not doing it right, the way it should be done, et cetera, is maintaining or sustaining that frustration actually precludes us from experiencing some of the grief that also goes along with this experience. Because as long as I keep trying and beating my head against the wall of trying to get this person to remember to do this, I've told them 7 times now, then I don't really have to deal with the sadness that comes with the fact that that's another part of him or her that I've lost. And so I think it's when you use the word balance, I mean, it's balancing and realizing sometimes I need to let the grief in. And I need to allocate some time to do that. Do we always try and do what we can to maintain our loved ones' independence? Yes. Keep them the way they were? Yes. But I think it's sometimes if we take a step back and say, how would somebody else view this? How would someone looking in, watching me trying to help my loved one, what feedback would they probably give me that I'm not willing to kind of consider myself? So I don't know if that really answered the multi-part question, but um, I
Yeah,
think I think
sorry to hit
control
you.
I think controllability is huge. And most of us are familiar with what's referred to as the serenity prayer,
Mhm.
kind of control what we can, let go of the things we can't, the wisdom to know the difference. That actually is seen as a major mechanism as to why caregivers have compromised immune systems, is because we're not actually exercising that wisdom. And again, maybe for a future talk, talking about acceptance, there's a variety of ways to do that, but it's not easy for people like us who are problem solvers, highly responsible, productive, on the go people. That's not accepting something that we can't control, if you will, in a weird kind of way. That's a form of control. Can you control how much time you allow yourself to not be in control? Kind of a play on words.
Absolutely, but so true. The one thing you do have control over is what you choose to control in your head. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned the grief, and obviously we're running out of time and we don't have time to delve into that, but that is another related stressor, and the avoidance of obviously contributes to it. And even sometimes walking through it is very stressful. So yeah, I think that that is a whole nother topic: acceptance, grieving, and the importance of allowing yourself to name the different types of grief. There's the anticipatory grief, the ambiguous grief,
Right.
the
Right.
loss that people experience, and it doesn't necessarily get recognition or identified as well as somebody that has lost a loved one and they're grieving a finality, a death. So
Right.
very
Right.
important.
But I also just appreciate Antoinette's comment about writing.
Mhm.
There's a whole literature on generally what are the kind of components of writing that are going to be most helpful in terms of emotional well-being. But absolutely, and it can be any kind of writing you want. But it doesn't have to be journaling. But you need a place, whether it be writing or with your BFF, some way to share your journey, because you're not going it alone. And I think what I appreciate about the Alliance is it's trying to help people realize that they're not alone. It's a shared experience of feeling alone, but you're not really alone. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. Um, I know that Amanda dropped some links in the chat to a couple of our resources that went nicely along with what Dr. Sieber was talking about. So there is a stress and burnout screen that you can download and take. There is a document about asking for help. And if you go to our website under resources tabs, there's a whole section just for care partners, with a variety of different tools that we would encourage you to check out if you haven't before on our newly renovated website from back in the fall. And we also, if you're not aware, there is a support group online for care partners, that you can also find on our website. That's twice a month. It's facilitated by a care partner. And, if you don't have one in your community or not engaged in one, we would love for you to connect. You can also look for someone in your own community through our new directory that we have just launched. There are support groups out there. If you want to be face to face with someone, as Dr. Sieber talked about, the importance of not being isolated and connecting with other people. We are together in this, and there are virtual as well as in-person options for you. So hopefully you are taking advantage of this. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Sieber,
You bet.
for your expertise today.
You bet. Maybe there'll be future opportunities, and let's stay connected.
Absolutely. I hope the rest of you have a wonderful day, and we will see you again soon. Take
Thank you
care.
much.
Bye.